Shalom, shalom lekulam. Once again, Baruch Hashem Yitbarach for being privileged to come back to our Torah study, the portion of the week, despite it being late. Warm greetings to us, for our respective followers and subscribers at the different platforms. There is a saying that if a people go by the definition of others, they lose their essence. Yeah, they lose their essence. So in other words, they leave the description or the script of those who have defined things. And this thing could be life. It could be anything. So we lose our own identity through the construct that define things for us. The Parashat of the week is Parashat Tetze, the secret of the rebellious child. When we look at this rebellious child and the way it comes from, how did it come that you have got a rebellious child? Where is this the spirit of rebellion come from? Our Torah tells us, and as we shall see, Bisharat Shmaya, Parashat Tetze, placed within Moshe's final address before entering the promised land, gathers a set of civil, familial, social, and military laws intended to organize a tribal life and a practical justice in the land of Canaan. The Parasha addresses rules of war and the treatment of captives, including a specific protection for captive women, a waiting period, prohibition of abuse, and the possibility of marriage and the emancipation. It defines the right and the status of children, including promignatures and the procedure applicable to rebellious children. It imposes an obligation to help recover another's lost property and protects the ownership rights. And it establishes norms of sexual morality and modesty, rules concerning virginity at marriage, suppression of rape, forbidden sexual relations, and a prohibition of mixed or cross-gender garments. This portion of the Torah also contains practical commandments about safety and honesty, roof railing, prohibition on mixed showing, and honoring vows, protections for workers and the vulnerable, prompt and fair payment of laborers, provisions for widows and orphans, and the living corners of the field for the poor, family and domestic laws, divorce, status of the husband, military exemption, as well as procedural rules governing evidence, and the limits on a corporal punishment. The Parasha likewise includes the levirate laws designate to secure family continuity, ethical commercial injunctions, prohibition against false weights and measures, and the directives concerning military conduct, and the memory of Amalek. Across these provisions, core ethical principles emerge: protection of vulnerable, procedural justice, respect for human dignity, social responsibility, and the primacy of the common good and the familial continuity. This portion of the Torah prescribes a solemn procedure for the Ben Sorel Umorech, More, literally the stubborn and the rebellious son. When parents find that a son refuses a parental authority, eats and drinks with scoundrels, and remains disobedient despite corrective measures, they must bring him before the elders of the city. After investigation and a conviction, the ultimate sanction provided by the Torah is stoning. The Talmud, Masechet Sanhedrin 68 Bet and 72 Aleph, however, treated this text with an intense jurisprudential effort to limit its scope. The sage imposed a series of procedural and effectual conditions so exacting a defining age range, repetition of conduct to specified decrees, clear evidence, properly conformed testimony, meticulous inquiries, that in a Talmudic practice, the punishment becomes virtually impossible to carry out. The Talmudic message is a twofold: to acknowledge the symbolic gravity of the biblical norm while confining it to an almost purely theoretical exemption, thereby guarding against hasty condemnations and favoring cautious procedural responses. The Ari Kadosh reads, the figure of Ben Sorel less as a mere social offense than the symptom of a profound spiritual disorder. In his Kabbalistic schema, stubborn and destructive behavior signals a poor reception of divine light within the soul, sometimes correlated with the problematic reincarnations, Gilgulim Ra'am, or with the domination by Kilipot forces of impurity that is smoother the Nitzotzot, divine sparks. Understood this way, the rebellious son is not merely a local legal case. He manifests on the familiar microcosm, a break that can spread and produce moral and spiritual contagion within the community. The city's intervention and the threshold of sanction therefore serves, in the Lurianic perspective, to contain and repair that breach, not to exercise violence for its own sake, but to preserve the collective spiritual health and enable a work of tikkun repair. They reinterpret the Ben Sorel's behavior as the effect of an accumulation of kilipot around divine sparks, These shells of impurity blocked the harmonious reception of the light and produce impulsivity, moral disassociation, and the ruptures in the social bonds. The law and its symbolic thread are thus conceived as a device intended to extract or contain these harmful forces before they scatter the nitzotzot further. That is, before spiritually infectious elements spread into other spheres of a communal life. For the Ari Kadosh, the elders' assembly is not merely a judicial court. It functions as a ritual organ of tikkun, meaning repair, through public speech, judgment, and the ritual gestures that may accompany the procedure. The elders replay a symbolic judicial ritual configurations capable of uttering the youth's spiritual trajectory, either by prompting awareness and reorientation, or by creating social conditions conducive to supervised reintegration. The community's intervention aims as much at restoration as at protection. The Torah's severest penalty expresses a drastic ritual separation. It signifies the removal of a toxic influence in order to preserve spiritual continuity and the collective transmission of the Torah. Within the Ari's framework, stoning symbolizes the radical expulsion of klipot from the social body. Yet, faithful to the Talmudic reading, he recognizes that this sanction is presented as a theological principle rather than an ordinary regulatory measure. Its practical application is exceedingly rare, and the halachic practice tended to favor reparative alternatives over execution. The Ari stresses that the community's primary stance must be preventative and pedagogical. Preferred remedies include instruction, corrective compassion, ritual act of tikkun, segulot, communal prayer, fasting, and other merit-based practices intended to restore the soul's capacity to receive the light. The logic is therapeutic to restore the soul's relationship to Torah, so as to prevent settled spiritual pathology. Punitive sanctions or sanction intervenes only as a last resort, after all avenues of repair have been exhausted and the community's spiritual survival is at stake. From Lurianic standpoint, the Ben Israel may be the outward manifestation of a broader process involving soul reincarnation. Unresolved past faults and the spiritual death can resurface as behavioral disturbance in the present generation. Hence, community intervention may need to exceed the individual level. One undertakes familiarly and a collective tikkunim, teshuvah, prayers for the ancestors, act of charity to clear the transgenerational debt and restore cosmic balance. The Ari proposes several practical implications: heightened vigilance for early signs of Kilipot influence, persistent antisocial conduct, sustained refusal of moral discipline, use of public speech, and the Council of Elders to establish a framework of responsibility and repair, and a marked preference for education and ritual remedies, study, prayer, communal strengthening, aimed at reintegrating the soul into the ways of Torah. Social exclusion or severe sanction is contemplated only after systematic failure of tikkun measure and when preservation of a communal body requires it. Theologically, the Ari recontextualizes the law as an instrument of tikkun rather than a mere retributive coercion. Justice, from this perspective, is restorative. It seeks to repair cosmic harmony and to preserve the divine sparks. Ethically, this entails collective responsibility. The community acts as a spiritual gardener that cultivates, tends, and when necessary, prunes to safeguard the health of the world. The Ari does not oppose the Talmudic reading, but complements it by supplying cosmic depth. He affirms that, in practice, the biblical penalty is highly unlikely to be applied, and underscores that halachic reality privileges strict procedures, protection against judicial error, and the prioritization of rehabilitation and the privation of execution. Just as the Torah has highlighted what to do when you, in your lineage, in your community, being in a village or in an urban area, you do have got rebellious child. The Torah here speaks about the son. What about the girl? Yes. In general, yes. We do have, unlike in the contemporary world, they have given us a thing called the human right. That man has to go to according to what he feels. Yeah, what he feels. We argue from personal point of view. I argue in most cases. If you can legislate something that the Torah prohibited, what out of the feeling of somebody who has committed certain things or who behaved immorally, and this seems to be advocated by modern states, institutions, whether government or not. What makes us to validate all to disapprove the other, which both the Torah might have prohibited. Here we are told how to approach all these matters as the Torah and our masters of previous generations have outlined. Now we look at from the Bandu Israelites, their own perspective, and we shall see that also is rooted in the Torah. The secret of the rebellious child according to the Bandu Israelite. And this is where the gender, instead of being a son or a girl, is accommodated, is reconciled according to the Bandu Israelite perspective. The child, the Bandu Israelite cosmology offers a deeply relational and ontological reading of human behavior. It does not reduce rebellion to a mere individual fault or any isolated psychological pathology, but understand it as the symptom of multiple imbalance, familial, collective, and cosmic, that calls for ritual, educational, and the relational remedies. In this vision, the world of living, the world of the ancestors are in a constant communication, unlike what they have told us, excuse me, that your forefathers, your ancestors, they are under the ground until that last day. That is against all odds. Even in a communities that are called primitive, the grave cannot contain a soul. You and I are constantly in a communication with our ancestors. Constantly. So social events manifest spiritual realities. The human being is seen as a composite entity, body, mundu, life breath, zambi, kimvuka, and spiritual double. Nizete ngisi, carrying a destiny and a transgenerational ties. The individual exists within a network of relations, clans, lineages, local territories, and the behavior is evaluated according to the quality of those relationships and the respect for ritual and the social rules or roles. Moral disorder or the violation of taboo opens the person and the community to harmful influences that unbalance social and cosmic life. For the Bene Israel, the spiritual origin of rebellion may be several and complementary: a rupture in family and the ritual ties, naming, initiation, rites of passage, such as circumcision or coming of age, that were insufficient, all interrupted. Transgenerational deaths and the imbalance, failure toward the ancestors, unresolved family conflict, the unveiling of a poorly oriented destiny, a child deprived of a framework needed to actualize his name, totem, or vocation, the influence of a disruptive spirit, or a charged object, gisi, bewitchment, and a breakdown in the ritual or social authority, the collapse of legitimate authority figures. Rebellion is therefore read not simply as an individual disorder, as an alarm signal. It indicates a collective malfunction, threatening fertility, prosperity, and peace, compromises ritual continuity, and can reflect a rupture between the world of the living and the ancestors, sometimes revealing ancestral suffering or any incarnational call. The traditional response among the Bnei Moshe combined ritual repair, social reintegration, and educational reform, unfolding across complementary stages. First, a ritual diagnosis performed by the Nganga, diviner, or ancestral advisor identifies the precise source of the disturbance. Next is some purification rites and the reestablishment of ties, offerings, fumigations, ritual baths, attachment ceremonies that reaffirms the youth's place in the lineage, naming, totem, the repetition, or the correction of a missed rite of passage, a communal purification, sacred songs, dances, libations, designated to reintegrate the child into the social fabric. We do not consider any convicted child or a punished child as an outcast. It's new to us, just as we did not have prison institution like we see, like that was brought to us. Transgenerational repair requires a collective teshuvah, public acknowledgement of familial failings, request for forgiveness, expiatory rituals, and a merit-earning act to appease the ancestors, legacy offerings, formula recitation, and if necessary, communal fast. On the education and the social level, the traditional reinforces the authority of elders and establishes a practical teaching and mentorship, supervised apprenticeship in a technical, moral, and ritual knowledge, progressive responsibility, and a structured communal work in which the youth is entrusted with a useful task that restore dignity, rite of passage may be renewed or corrected to provide a stable symbolic framework. If a malign influence is identified, the Nganga may fashion a protective ngisi, invert a hostile ngisi, apply ointment and herbs, and they carry out counter-magical interventions and the symbolic removal of charged object. What did they do to us? They have done a lot. They made you and I to despise all of these traditions and our cultural norms. And they demonized them. In the later generations, this becomes a norm. This becomes a mockery. When a person is identified as a Nganga, how do we look at them? And how do we judge them? We judge them exactly through the eyes of those who sent our ancestors, our institutions, to the annals of history. In parallel, restorative social measure, family mediation led by elders, facilitated dialogues, supervision, progressive reintegration with ritual recognitions complete the response. For the 10 tribes of Israel, the underlying moral and the pedagogical logic emphasizes education as a ritual inscription. Teaching is the act of placing the child within a cosmic and a social narrative. Discipline is initiatory, not merely punitive. Educational responsibility is collective. Correction and the restoration are shared by the community. And the aim is to return the person to harmony rather than to exclude them permanently. Practically, some communities favor renewed initiations, ceremonies, or symbolic rituals, marriage to mark reintegration, while others emphasize craft apprenticeship and the oral transmission by elders. Protocols vary according to the severity age, the nature of the disturbance, and the availability of ritual specialists. In a contemporary context, diaspora, urbanization, Christianization, Islamization, these traditional practices often coexist with modern approaches. Psychotherapy, schooling, social educational programs. Nganga and the traditional leaders sometimes collaborate with a secular specialist to implement a mixed protocol combining ritual, psychological support, and vocational training. In sum, for Bantu Israelite cosmology, the rebellion of a poorly educated child is primarily a symptom of relational and a spiritual disorder that requires a collective, multifaceted response, ritual diagnosis, purification, ancestral repair, reaffirmation of rites of passage, educational support, and social integration. The goal is not mere punishment, but the restoration of cosmic balance and the continuity of social ties, repairing spiritual debts, repositioning the child within their lineage, and ensuring the protection and the prosperity of the whole community. Tzadikim, tzadakot, across different platforms, this is the Torah. This is the word of our sages. These are the words of our masters, irrespective of ethnicity, land, and the continent. It was a pleasure to learn Torah with you. B'shirat Shemaya. We look forward to learn Torah with you. See you next time. Baruch Adonai, Leolam, Amen, Ve'amen.